Okay, so vitamin D, when you hear that, you probably think bones, right? Maybe sunshine, milk, that sort of thing. But what if I told you the sunshine vitamin? Well, it's actually a crucial player for like everything from your muscles, your immune system, even helping prevent injuries. And this is especially true if you're an athlete or, just someone who leads a very active life. So today we're doing a deep dive. We're looking at the latest science on vitamin D, our mission to really unpack why it's so much more than just a bone nutrient. Why are so many people falling short? What does it mean for your health, your athletic performance, and importantly, how can you actually optimize your levels safely? Think of this as your shortcut, your guide to being really well informed on vitamin D. We'll explore where the science is at, clear up some common confusion, and give you actionable insights tailored for you and your active lifestyle. All right, let's pull back the curtain then. Let's really understand what vitamin D is beyond what we maybe thought we do. And the first big surprise, well, it's not really just a vitamin. It's more accurately described as a pre-hormone, which means its active form works with these special receptors. And these receptors are found, well, literally everywhere in your body. Muscles, immune cells, brain tissue, even cells that regulate growth, seriously, everywhere. This widespread presence, it means vitamin D has what scientists call pleiotropic effects. Basically, it's a multi-talented nutrient, super versatile. It influences everything from your immune function and cell growth right through to muscle physiology. It even shows potential, and this is interesting, potential to reduce risks for chronic conditions. Things like cardiovascular disease, certain cancers, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune disorders, even infectious diseases. It's truly incredible how much it does. But despite these critical roles, vitamin D deficiency is a massive global public health issue. It impacts an estimated, wait for it, 1 billion people worldwide. A billion. And here's a surprising fact. Get this. High deficiency rates. They're seen even in really sun-rich areas like South America, the Middle East, Asia. So this tells us that simply getting sunshine isn't the only factor. It's not the whole story. Other key influences include, well, your diet, obviously. Lifestyle choices too, like how much time you spend indoors. Clothing choices. Your skin pigmentation plays a role. Your age, obesity, and even public health policies around things like food fortification. So why is this particularly important for you? For our active listeners, whether you're a competitive athlete or just someone who loves staying active, well, vitamin D is implicated in, okay, let's list them. Muscle function, strength, post-exercise recovery, how your body manages inflammation, your immune defense, and especially reducing injury risk, most notably those dreaded bone stress fractures. And we see a really high prevalence of inadequacy among athletes. You might have unique risk factors too, training indoors a lot, wearing protective gear or clothing, training early mornings or late evenings when the sun isn't strong. Plus, intense training just increases your body's demands. The key insight here, and this is important, emerging evidence suggests the optimal vitamin D levels for peak physiological function under intense training might actually be higher than what's considered sufficient for the general population. Higher. Okay, so how do you even know your vitamin D status? How do you find out where you stand? Well, the standard way is a blood test. Pretty simple. It measures something called 25-hydroxyvitamin D. Let's call it 25-OHD. Why this one? Well, it's a stable indicator of your body's vitamin D reserves over weeks because it's synthesized from all your sources, sun, diet, supplements. It reflects the bigger picture. And just a quick note on units because you'll see different ones. It's usually reported as NmL, nanomoles per liter, or NGmL, nanograms per milliliter. And the conversion is simple. 1 NGmL equals 2.5 nanomL. Good to keep in mind. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky, a bit confusing sometimes. There's actually no single universally agreed upon number for what's deficient or insufficient or optimal. Different expert groups, like the U.S. Institute of Medicine or IOM versus the Endocrine Society. There are varying thresholds, different cutoff points, and this often comes down to what health outcomes they're focusing on. Is it just bone health? Or are they looking at broader non-skeletal benefits too? So for example, the IOM, focusing mainly on bone health, they consider levels at or above 50 mmol, that's 20 NGmL, to be sufficient, okay? 50 mmol. But the Endocrine Society, they take a broader view. They include muscle function, other benefits, and they suggest sufficiency is actually at or above 75 millimol. That's 30 NGmL. So quite a jump there, right? From 50 to 75. You might also hear about severe deficiency, like below 25 or 30 nmol. The crucial takeaway for you, especially being active, is that the levels considered maybe just enough for basic bone health are often much lower than what current research suggests might be needed to really maximize your active lifestyle. There's a significant difference between what's merely adequate and what might be truly optimal for peak function. Keep that 75 millimole figure in mind. Oh, it's worth noting, even with a test, results can sometimes vary slightly between different labs. But the good news is there are ongoing efforts to standardize these measurements, which is making them more and more reliable. And for those of you who really love the science deep dive, there's emerging research too, looking into something called bioavailable or free 25-OPHD, basically the portion of vitamin D that's not bound up by proteins in your blood. The idea is this might be more readily accessible to your tissues.
It's not routine testing yet, but it adds another fascinating layer, doesn't it? So given all this complexity, where do we stand globally? What's the big picture? Well, systematic reviews, they paint a pretty concerning picture, honestly. A huge meta-analysis looking at data from 2000 to 2022, nearly 8 million people, found that globally, almost half, a staggering 47.9%, have insufficient vitamin D. That means their levels are below that 57 mol. All half the world. And get this, over 3/4, 76.6%, are below 75 millibleen. That level, many experts now suggest for broader health benefits. So yeah, roughly 1 billion people worldwide have insufficient vitamin D. It's massive. Now, latitude and season play a huge role, as you'd expect. For example, if you live up north, say above 40 degrees north latitude, think north of Madrid or Philadelphia, the sunlight intensity just isn't strong enough to make adequate vitamin D in your skin for a big chunk of the year, maybe October to March. So you naturally see seasonal drops in levels. Makes sense. But it's really interesting. Sometimes northern European countries actually show better vitamin D status than southern ones. How does that work?
Well, it's not because of more sun, obviously. It's often down to effective public health measures, like mandatory food fortification. Finland's a great example of where this has worked well. Plus, diets that are traditionally richer in oily fish help too. In the U.S., studies like NABs show certain groups consistently have higher rates of deficiency. Non-Hispanic Black Americans, Hispanic Americans. That's often linked to melanin in the skin, which acts like a natural sunscreen. Also, older adults, people who are obese, and perhaps surprisingly, young adults aged 20-29 show higher risk too. So just to recap what influences your vitamin D levels, it's a real mix, isn't it? Sunlight exposure, sure, but also skin pigmentation, lifestyle, how much time indoors, diet, supplements, age, body composition, medical conditions, even your genetics, lots of factors. Okay. Now let's talk about what's considered optimal for general health. Because as we've seen, the debate continues. While 50 amol or 20 ng/ml is considered adequate for basic bone health by some, there's a growing body of research suggesting higher levels might offer broader benefits.
Many studies suggest these optimal benefits actually start kicking in around 75 mmol or 30 ng/ml, and some research points even higher, maybe 90 to 100 nanomol, that's 36 to 40 ng/ml, for the best outcomes across various health markers, really maximizing things. For instance, looking at overall mortality risk or cardiovascular disease risk. Optimal levels are often suggested to be above that 75 nanomolar mark for infections and immunity. Low levels are clearly linked to be more susceptible, and some experts propose even higher levels, like maybe 125 to 150 nmol, for optimal immune defense. The key takeaway here again is that the levels associated with these broader benefits, they're consistently higher than that IOM's bone-focused sufficiency threshold of 50. Now, you might have heard some talk about a U-shaped curve with vitamin D, the idea that, too much could be just as bad as too little. With the sweet spot, the lowest risk, often cited somewhere between 75 and 100 nmol. Let's really dig into that for a second. Because for active, healthy individuals like you, the truth is often much simpler. While yeah, some isolated studies show this U-shape,
the vast majority of really robust studies and meta-analyses, they show something different. They show either a continuous decrease in risk as levels go up, or maybe a plateau. But critically, no increased risk at higher physiological levels you'd get from sun or sensible supplements. So what explains those odd U-shaped findings then? Well, it could be things like reverse causation, meaning maybe sick people are more likely to take supplements, which creates a misleading link between high levels and poor health. It's not causal. Or perhaps it's specific to certain populations, like maybe frail, elderly people, not healthy, active folks. So the conclusion here, strong evidence for detrimental effects of non-toxic levels, say up to 125 atrimol, in the general healthy population. It's pretty weak, it's inconsistent. Don't let worries about this U-shape deter you from aiming for those higher beneficial levels we talked about. Okay, let's bring it right back to you, the active individual and that athlete's edge. We've established that vitamin D inadequacy is super common among athletes across many sports. Often over 50% have suboptimal levels. That's huge. And we've touched on the specific risk factors, indoor training, the season, latitude effects, plus just the increased physiological demands of intense training. Your body needs more. So how does vitamin D help? Well, it directly influences your muscles because your muscle cells actually have those specific receptors for it, the VDRs. This means it plays a role in gene expression for muscle cell growth and even how your muscles handle calcium, which is absolutely critical for contraction. Now, for strength and power, the evidence is a bit mixed, to be honest. Some studies do show improvements, yeah, especially in athletes starting with low levels, maybe below 50 to 75 nmol. But if you're already sufficient, Intervention studies often don't find a statistically significant boost in maximal strength or power. However, where vitamin D really seems to shine for athletes is in recovery and inflammation. There's pretty good evidence for its role in muscle regeneration after tough exercise. For instance, one study found that supplementing with 4,000 IUs per day improved muscle burst recovery in men who started out with inadequate vitamin D levels, and lower levels, say below 23 ng/ml, have been linked to more muscle injuries. Makes sense. Vitamin D also promotes anti-inflammatory pathways, and it enhances your innate immunity, your first line of defense. Low levels linked to higher inflammation in athletes. And higher levels, for example, above 95 Vin and Malo, are associated with a lower incidence of upper respiratory tract infections, colds, flu. Things that can totally derail your training schedule and sideline you, right? We all hate that. But perhaps the most compelling reason for active individuals to pay attention to vitamin D is its profound impact on injury prevention, particularly bone health. Vitamin D is absolutely fundamental for calcium and phosphate absorption, which are essential for building strong mineralized bones. Deficiency leads to increased bone breakdown, weaker bones, and the evidence for stress fractures. It's consistent, it's strong. Low 25 OHD, often defined as below 75 millimole or 30 ng/ml, is consistently linked to a significantly increased risk of stress fractures in active populations. Imagine you're training hard for a marathon, right? Putting in all those miles, and then boom, sidelined by a stress fracture. It's devastating.
Well, vitamin D often plays this quiet but really powerful role in preventing exactly that. Quick example, Finnish military recruits. Those with levels below 75 ULL. They had a remarkable 3.6 times higher risk of stress fractures, 3.6 times. And another study, in U.S. Navy recruits, supplementation with just 800 IUs per day plus calcium reduced their stress fracture incidence by 20%, just with a modest dose. So, okay, well, direct performance boosts for athletes who are already sufficient or maybe still debated, the really robust evidence for preventing stress fractures, muscle injury, and illness, all of which lead to lost training time. That provides a really strong rationale for active individuals like you to prioritize getting to optimal vitamin D status, because consistent training. That's absolutely key to long-term athletic development, isn't it? So given all of this, what are the optimal vitamin D levels for athletes? Well, a consensus seems to be emerging, and it's pointing towards higher targets than the general population, which makes sense, reflecting those increased physiological demands. The minimum recommended level, generally above 75 to 82 ng/ml. That's 30 to 32 ng/ml. Minimum.
But for preferred or truly optimal levels, many experts recommend consistently aiming above 100 nmol. That's 40 ng/ml. Some even suggest an ideal target range of 100 to 150 nanomoles or 40 to 60 ng/ml. This range is considered safe, and it also accounts for any slight lab variability. Aim for that 100+ mark. All right, so now the practical part, your action plan. How do you get to optimal safely? Step 1, assess your status. Get tested. It's highly recommended to get your serum 25 OHD concentration tested, especially if you're an athlete. Train indoors a lot, live at higher latitudes, or have darker skin. And periodic monitoring is probably wise, maybe annually or seasonally, just to see how your levels are doing and how they respond to any changes you make. Step 2, consider non-supplement strategies. But, with a dose of reality, sunlight is the most potent natural way, sure, but its effectiveness depends so heavily on latitude, season, time of day, skin color, how much skin you expose, sunscreen use. It's often insufficient, especially for athletes with specific training schedules. And of course, there are skin cancer risks to consider. Dietary sources, they're very limited naturally.
Think fatty fish like salmon or mackerel, cod liver oil, some mushrooms, egg yolks, small amounts, fortified foods like milk, some cereals, orange juice. But usually they're not enough on their own to reach those optimal levels, especially for athletes with higher demands. Which brings us to step 3. Supplementation strategies. For most active individuals, this is usually necessary to bridge the gap. You want to look for vitamin D3. That's cholecalciferol. It's a preferred form. It's more potent, more effective than vitamin D2. So D3 is the way to go. Now, dosages. For the general population, the RDAs are typically 600 to 800 IU per day. But as we've discussed, these are often inadequate to reach optimal levels, like above 75 or 100 mellow. Many people probably need 1,000 to 2,000 IUs per day just to get to a good baseline. For athletes aiming for those optimal levels above 100 IU per day, you often need more, typically in the range of 2,000 to 5,000 IUs per day. Now, for rapid correction of a significant deficiency, some protocols use higher doses, maybe up to 10,000 IUs per day for several weeks, or sometimes large weekly doses, like 20,000 to 70,000 IUs. But while these big doses can work quickly, daily lower doses are generally preferred physiologically. They help maintain stable levels and avoid, metabolic disruption. Steady wins the race here. And remember, individual variation is huge. How you respond depends on many factors. So personalized dosing based on your baseline levels and maybe body weight is ideal.
Even 10,000 IUs per day might not bring all deficient athletes into the sufficient range. It really varies. Oh, and a practical tip. For best absorption, always take your vitamin D supplements with a meal that contains some fat. Okay, let's talk safety. Because it's natural to wonder, can I take too much? I know. Vitamin D toxicity, it's technically called hypervitaminosis D. It is rare, really rare. It almost exclusively comes from excessive supplementation, but way over the top doses. You won't get it from sun exposure or diet. Your body regulates that. Toxicity is characterized by dangerously high calcium levels in your blood. That's hypercalcemia. And this is generally considered unlikely unless your blood levels get incredibly high. We're talking exceeding 375 ml, which is 150 ngml. Case reports of actual toxicity often show levels well above 1,000 APL or 400 ngml, astronomical levels. Symptoms, if it did happen. Things like fatigue, weakness, nausea, vomiting, constipation, excessive urination or thirst, kidney stones, headache. Severe cases could even involve heart arrhythmias. But again, the main causes are errors, like manufacturing mistakes, labeling errors, inappropriate prescribing, or someone accidentally taking way too much. It's a truly rare event. In fact, studies show very few clinical symptoms, even at levels above 200 ml or 80 ngml. Now, health authorities set something called tolerable upper intake levels, or ULs. This is the maximum daily intake considered unlikely to pose a risk for almost everyone. For adults, this is generally set at 4,000 IUs per day. And the key point here, the ULs have a massive safety margin built in. The gap between the UL of 4,000 IUs per day and the levels that actually cause toxicity, often way above 50,000 IUs per day. It's huge. So don't let the idea of toxicity scare you off aiming for beneficial optimal levels. However, there was a recent meta-analysis looking at long-term supplementation right around that UL. So doses like 3,200 to 4,000 IUs per day. It did find small, but statistically significant increases in things like hypercalcemia, falls, and hospitalization compared to lower doses. So my interpretation for you. While these doses near the UL are still very safe from a true toxicity perspective, long-term use might carry a very small population-level risk compared to lower intakes. It really just emphasizes the importance of monitoring your levels if you consistently take doses above, say, 4,000 IUs per day, and finding the lowest effective dose that keeps you in your personal optimal range. Now, this raises a really important point. Vitamin D doesn't work in isolation. Its actions are intricately linked with other key nutrients. We call them cofactors. First up, let's talk about this synergy between vitamin D and vitamin K2. This is fascinating. Okay, so vitamin D helps your body produce certain proteins that bind calcium, like osteocalcin for your bones and matrix glab protein, or MGP, for your arteries. But vitamin K2 is absolutely vital to activate these proteins through a process called carboxylation. So for your bone health, taking D3 and K2 together, it may be more effective for improving bone mineral density and reducing fracture risk. And for cardiovascular health, activated MGP, thanks to K2, helps inhibit calcium from depositing in your arterial walls, which is crucial for preventing hardening of the arteries, atherosclerosis. Low status of both D and K has been linked to higher blood pressure and cardiovascular disease risk. And while K2 isn't like a direct antidote to detoxicity, ensuring you have enough K2 helps make sure the calcium goes where you want it, your bones, and stays away from soft tissues like arteries, especially when your vitamin D levels are higher. Then there's the synergy between vitamin D and magnesium, another crucial player. Magnesium is an essential cofactor for loads of enzymes involved in vitamin D metabolism. You actually need magnesium to convert vitamin D into its usable forms in the liver and kidneys. In fact, magnesium deficiency can seriously impair your entire vitamin D pathway. If you're low on magnesium, just taking vitamin D supplements might not even work properly until your magnesium levels are repleted. And the relevance here, modern diets are often pretty low in magnesium, so many people might be unknowingly hindering their vitamin D optimization efforts simply because they're short on magnesium. There's actually growing interest now in combining all three, vitamin D3, K2, and magnesium, for really comprehensive support for both bone and cardiovascular health. It makes a lot of sense synergistically. Okay, we've covered a lot today, haven't we? Let's try and synthesize. You now know that vitamin D's role goes way beyond just strong bones. It impacts your muscles, your immunity, your injury resilience, crucial for an active life. We also unpack the complexity around defining optimal levels, especially for active individuals like you who might benefit from higher targets in the general population. Remember that 100 unmol goal? We've looked at the global prevalence of deficiency. It's huge. We explored strategies for optimization, from sun and food to smart supplementation. And hopefully, we reassured you about the rarity and causes of toxicity while still stressing the importance of safe supplementation practices like monitoring. And we highlighted those critical roles of cofactors like vitamin K2 and magnesium. Don't forget them. So my call to action for you is this. consider getting your vitamin D levels checked, especially if you're highly active. Talk about supplementation with a healthcare professional who understands your needs. Keep in mind those target ranges we discussed, aiming for that optimal zone, and maybe consider those important cofactors, K2 and magnesium, as part of the picture. And here's a final thought for you to take away. As you reflect on your own activity levels, your lifestyle, your diet, what single small change could you make this week to positively influence your vitamin D status, or maybe that of a loved one? Something to think about. Thanks so much for diving deep with me on this one. It's a really important topic. Until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and stay active.